Okay, so let's just jump right into it. We're talking about what really feels like a political earthquake in New York City.
Yeah, a huge one. The headline news, obviously, Zohran Mamdani declaring victory in the Democratic mayoral primary.
And maybe even more stunningly, Andrew Cuomo conceding. That's just not what most people expected.
Not at all. Mamdani, in his speech, he said, "Tonight, we made history." Pretty powerful stuff.
And Cuomo himself acknowledged it quite directly, didn't he? Something like, tonight was Assemblyman Mamdani's night.
Yeah, and he put together a great campaign. That's a direct quote. It acknowledges the reality on the ground.
It really underlines how much of an upset this was. I mean, Andrew Cuomo, he's this 67-year-old titan, right? State politics, local politics, former governor.
Absolutely. A known quantity for decades, attempting this major political comeback after, resigning in 2021. It was a high-stakes play.
And then you have Zohran Mamdani, 33 years old, a Democratic socialist, first major mayoral run.
And now poised to be the city's first Muslim and Indian-American mayor. It's historic just on those grounds alone, let alone the political upset.
Especially given Cuomo's lead in the early polls, people thought he had it sewn up.
Exactly. Which is why we really need to dig into this. Our mission today for this deep dive is to figure out how this actually happened. How does such a big upset occur?
Yeah, what does it tell us about, the political currents right now? Not just in New York, which is always its own beast, but maybe for the Democrats more broadly.
Right. What were the underlying factors, the strategies, the sheer nerve, maybe, that led to this? So let's start by looking at the candidates themselves. A real study in contrasts.
Couldn't be more different. Mamdani first, the progressive challenger.
Yeah, he's a state assemblyman from Queens Astoria, Long Island City. Area's known for, diversity and growing progressive energy.
And his background is interesting too, right? Born in Uganda, moved here young.
Moved to New York at 7, yeah. That immigrant experience, growing up in the city, likely gives him a very different perspective on, the challenges ordinary families face, the aspirations of different communities.
And that seems baked into his platform. Afford to live and afford to dream.
Yeah.
Envelope ambitious is maybe an understatement.
Oh, definitely. He's not talking small tweaks. He's aiming for a fundamental shift in the cost of living. Think about the rent freeze on stabilized units.
That alone would be huge.
Yeah.
Affecting millions of people immediately.
Instantly. But then add building 200,000 affordable housing units on top of that. The scale is just massive.
Yeah, 200,000. How do you even do that? It requires immense political will, funding, rethinking how the city uses land.
It does, and it doesn't stop there. Free city buses.
Right. Free public transport. That's a whole other level of policy shift for a city like New York.
It is. People talk about accessibility, congestion, emissions.
Right.
But the practical side, the cost, the infrastructure, that's immense.
And free childcare, too. Another transformative idea for working families.
Absolutely. It addresses a huge burden, potentially frees up income, boosts workforce participation. Again, massive potential impact, but huge implementation challenges.
But the one that really jumped out at me, maybe the most surprising, city-owned grocery stores.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, almost radical proposal for a major U.S. city, isn't it? It goes right at issues like food deserts, affordability.
So areas where people just can't easily get fresh, affordable food, often lower-income neighborhoods.
Exactly. And this is a direct sort of municipal socialist approach. The city stepping in where the market is seen as failing. It's about ensuring basic needs.
So the motivation is clear. Tackle food costs, ensure access. But the potential reach, how it integrates, it's definitely not your typical campaign plank.
No, it signals a very fundamental approach, believing access to healthy food is a right. And yes, setting them up requires investment, logistics, dealing with existing suppliers. But it speaks volumes about his vision.
And how does he propose paying for all this? The rent freeze, housing, buses, childcare, groceries.
Well, he's got specific proposals. Raising the corporate tax and a flat 2% tax on top earners.
Classic progressive funding mechanisms, essentially.
Yeah.
Taxing corporations and the wealthy more to fund public services.
Precisely. It's a clear statement about who should shoulder the cost and who benefits. Always sparks debate about, economic impact, businesses leaving. But for proponents, it's about fairness and correcting imbalances.
And his campaign style itself was a huge factor, right? This youthful energy, the social media stuff.
Oh, absolutely. He really leveraged social media incredibly well. Viral videos, that Urdu campaign video with Bollywood clips.
I saw that. It got a ton of attention.
It did. And speaking Spanish in some remarks, it's about connecting authentically, culturally, meeting voters where they are, literally speaking their language.
So not just generic messaging, really targeting specific communities.
Exactly. And apparently it worked. Reports say he did extensive outreach in South Asian and Muslim communities in Queens, Flushing, Corona, and overperformed there. That targeted approach builds a really strong base.
More than just votes, it becomes a movement.
Right. And he had major endorsements backing him up. Bernie Sanders, AOC, the Working Families Party.
That puts him squarely in that progressive wing.
Yeah.
Gives him credibility, organizing power.
Definitely. And Brad Lander, who we'll talk more about, had that great quote something like, it's not about progressives versus moderates, it's fighters versus fakers.
Right. What Zohran is showing is that it's worth putting up big, bold ideas, standing up and fighting for them. That captures the spirit, doesn't it?
It really does. And Mamdani's own messaging reinforced that. Hope is not naive. It is righteous when built upon a plan and a vision, framing it as pragmatic hope.
And positioning himself against Trumpism, too, the antidote to the hatred and division.
A clear contrast, offering a different kind of leadership, a different direction.
And the volunteer numbers. 40,000, that's staggering.
Astonishing. Even if there were questions about organization, that sheer number shows incredible enthusiasm and belief. It's pure people power.
A real contrast to the other side. Let's talk about Cuomo now.
Right. The veteran. The comeback attempt. His history is just woven into New York politics. 3-term governor.
The Titan status. Trying to re-enter after resigning in 21 amid all those controversies.
Yeah, the sexual harassment allegations, the nursing home data issues. This wasn't just an election. It was a bid for redemption, really.
Yeah.
And most assumed he'd pull it off.
Based partly on his resources, I imagine. The spending was just, wow.
$20 million on ads. Just think about that. More than all the other candidates combined.
In a primary that saw $37 million total ad spend. So he accounted for more than half of it himself.
Exactly. A classic top-down, saturate the airwaves strategy, relying on financial muscle.
Total opposite of Mamdani's grassroots social media approach. Two completely different playbooks.
And Cuomo's money came from predictable places, right? Deep-pocketed donors, establishment figures like Bill Clinton.
Positioning him as the establishment choice, relying on those traditional power networks.
Which makes his concession even more significant. He called Mamdani, congratulated him.
And publicly acknowledged the campaign's impact, especially with young people.
Yeah, saying Mamdani touched young people and he inspired them and moved them. Coming from Cuomo, that's a pretty strong acknowledgement of what Mamdani achieved.
But Cuomo didn't completely close the door, did he? Mentioned analyzing the ranked choice numbers.
Right. And crucially, noted he'd qualified to run on an independent line in November.
So he's keeping his options open, not ruling out a general election run.
Definitely seems that way. Which leads us to another key player here, Brad Lander.
The city controller. Initially seen as a progressive favorite himself.
Yes, but his role became absolutely crucial through his alliance with Mamdani, that cross-endorsement strategy.
That was smart and very direct. Goal number 1, add our votes together to block Andrew Cuomo.
No subtlety there. A calculated move specifically designed for ranked choice voting. They even did robocalls urging voters to leave Cuomo off the ballot entirely.
So a unified progressive front to stop Cuomo using the RCV rules.
Exactly. Lander talked about politics as a team sport for making the city better. And he was right there celebrating at Mamdani's victory party. It showed that teamwork paid off.
And Lander has his own progressive cred, right? Getting arrested, protesting with immigrants recently.
Yeah, that definitely solidified his standing within that activist wing.
So beyond Mamdani, Cuomo, and Lander, there were other dynamics too. City Council Speaker Adrienne Adams.
Yeah, she was apparently exhilarated, backed by AG Letitia James. Probably saw how RCV could consolidate progressive power, even if she wasn't the top choice for everyone, understanding the system.
And Alvin Bragg winning re-election as Manhattan DA, fresh off the Trump prosecution.
Right, well, not directly the mayoral primary. It reflects the mood of the city's Democrats, supporting figures challenging that national narrative.
And then there's the current mayor, Eric Adams, running as an independent. He won via RCV last time.
He did, and he was pretty critical of the primary challengers. Plus, there's that complicated history with the dropped bribery charges and the alleged Trump administration intervention.
Adds another layer to the whole political environment, even if not directly tied to this primary outcome.
For sure, it's a complex web, but the thread tying so much of this primary strategy together was ranked choice voting itself.
RCV, or instant runoff voting. We really need to unpack how that works, because it was fundamental here.
Absolutely crucial. For you listening, if you're not familiar, it's different from just picking one candidate. You rank them first choice, second, third, up to fifth if you want.
Simple enough for the voter, but the counting is where it gets strategic.
Exactly. They count the first choice votes. If nobody gets over 50%, which is common with multiple candidates, the rounds begin.
Okay, so round 1, check the first choices. No majority.
Then the candidate with the fewest first choice votes gets eliminated. And here's the key part. Their votes aren't just lost. They get reallocated to whoever those voters ranked second among the candidates still left.
So your second choice actually matters if your first choice is knocked out.
Precisely. And this repeats. Eliminate the last place candidate, reallocate their votes based on the next available ranking until someone finally gets over that 50% mark.
Ensures the winner has broader support, not just a narrow plurality.
That's the idea. And New York City had used this before, right?
Yeah, this was the second time for a mayoral primary. Eric Adams won in 2021 after several rounds of RCV counting.
Wow.
So people knew it could dramatically shape the outcome.
But important reminder, RCV is not used in the general election in November. That'll be a straight-up, simple majority wins, totally different game.
Which brings us back to how Mamdani and Lander used RCV strategically. That cross-endorsement wasn't just symbolic.
Not at all. It was a deliberate tactic. Combine their progressive support, Mamdani called Cuomo's campaign a house of cards that the two strongest progressives could topple using RCV.
A preemptive coalition, basically. Banking on the idea that Lander voters would likely rank Mamdani second, and vice versa.
Exactly. Maximize that second and third choice potential under the rules.
But Cuomo voters had a counter-strategy, didn't they? The bullet vote.
Yeah, some apparently just ranked Cuomo first and left the rest blank. The idea is to stop your vote potentially helping someone else later.
Kind of an all-or-nothing approach. If Cuomo doesn't win in the first round, your vote doesn't influence the later rounds.
Right. It's a gamble. But the initial results suggested the Mamdani-Lander strategy was working better.
What did those first numbers look like?
After about 93% of the first round votes were counted, Mamdani was actually leading 43.5% to Cuomo's 36.4%, with Lander around 11.4%.
So nobody near 50%. RCV was definitely going to kick in.
CBS News projected that immediately, and the general expectation was that Mamdani would gain significantly as Lander's votes reallocated.
Because of that progressive alignment and the cross-endorsement.
Precisely. Marcia Kramer's analysis for CBS pointed out that standard wisdom, if Cuomo was way ahead, like 10 plus points, he'd probably hold on, but if it was closer, like 5 points or less.
Mamdani had the advantage, and those first-round numbers put him right in that sweet spot. The math looked good for him.
Yeah, the RCV math seemed to favor the upset. Now let's talk about Election Day itself. Beyond the votes, the engagement was interesting.
High turnout, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Approaching 1.1 million voters.
Yeah, more than a third of registered Democrats in the city, and noticeably higher than the 2021 primary turnout. People were energized.
And early voting was significant, too. Almost 400,000 people voted early.
Between June 14th and 22nd. And those early results, analyses suggested, leaned towards Mamdani. His campaign got his base out early.
And a borough breakdown on that.
Brooklyn had the highest early vote count, Staten Island the lowest. Brooklyn also led in total Election Day turnout, widespread participation.
Despite the weather. It was incredibly hot, right?
Historically hot. Up to 100 degrees F in the city, 103 degrees F in Newark nearby, a record for June. Just brutal conditions to be standing in line.
Governor Hochul even issued an order about water for voters.
Yeah, ensuring people could get refreshments. It really shows the determination of New Yorkers to vote enduring that kind of heat. It speaks volumes about their commitment.
And the polling leading up to this. That was a roller coaster.
For a long time, poll after poll showed Cuomo winning. Comfortably, even. The narrative seemed set.
Until right at the end. That Emerson PIX11 The Hill poll.
Released the day before the election. And crucially, it included an RCV simulation. And that simulation showed Mamdani winning after reallocation.
Huge news just before Election Day. Must have given Mamdani supporters a massive boost.
Absolutely. Empirical evidence that the upset was possible, even likely, under RCV. It showed the flaw in polls that didn't simulate the ranked choice aspect properly.
Really underscores the difference between the campaigns, too. Cuomo's $20 million ad blitz, tightly managed appearances.
Versus Mamdani's focus on grassroots, social media, direct engagement with far fewer resources.
And in this case, the grassroots approach, combined with the RCV strategy, won out over the sheer financial power.
Seems that way. Which has national implications, people are saying.
Yeah. Marcia Kramer again, drawing parallels to other races, AOC beating Crowley in 2018.
The classic insurgent versus establishment progressive win.
But then also Latimer beating Bowman more recently.
Showing the establishment pushing back, sometimes successfully, against progressives, a more moderate win.
So Kramer posed the question, is Mamdani this cycle's AOC? Or does Cuomo's strong showing, despite losing, mean moderates still hold sway?
It became this litmus test, didn't it? Watch across the country. What kind of Democrat are voters looking for now, especially after, as the sources put it, Trump's second victory?
Yeah, is this a signal? A rebuke to the establishment? A win for grassroots progressivism?
It certainly feels like it could be. People are calling Mamdani's campaign a potential blueprint for the party, showing a better day as possible through that kind of organizing and bold vision. Forces
the party to really look at the energy and appeal on its left flank.
And that energy was apparently electric at Mamdani's victory party.
Tell us about that scene. The greats of Craft LIC, a rooftop bar in Queens.
Yeah, described as a sweat-soaked crowd, partly the heat, partly the packed room, pure excitement. When Cuomo conceded, it was just disbelief, victory, schadenfreude. A huge release.
You can picture it. The Afford to Live and Afford to Dream banner up.
Hand-painted with the paid-for by Zohran detail. Very grassroots.
And the setup was apparently a bit chaotic. Not enough space, AC struggling.
Still setting up after polls closed. But it didn't matter. It felt authentic, like a real movement celebration, not some polished corporate event. The passion was the main thing.
And who was there? Sounded like a diverse crowd.
Definitely. Cal Penn, the actor, apparently a family friend since Mamdani was 14, was speechless. Ella Emhoff, Kamala Harris's stepdaughter, a Brooklyn fixture, wearing a Mamdani bandana.
Signals that kind of cultural and generational buy-in.
Yeah. And politically, Cynthia Nixon was there. Huge Cuomo critic, ran against him in 2018. Said she felt overwhelming emotion, never been so excited for someone and against someone simultaneously. Vindication for her.
Wow. And other political figures.
Osei, the councilman, an early backer. Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, another early endorser. Even former Rep. Jamal Bowman was there. David Hogg, the activist, whose Pete Show endorsed Mamdani.
A real coalition of the progressive wing.
Absolutely. And the campaign manager, L. Biscard Church, specifically thanked the Democratic Socialists of America, crowd chanting DSA, DSA, owning that identity, saying the campaign was run by the left and organized to win.
A clear statement of their political base and power.
Then Mamdani himself speaks. Tonight, we made history. Asserts he'll be the nominee.
And tried to reach out, right? Talked about partnership, sincerity.
Well, promising to be mayor for everyone, whether they voted for him, Cuomo, or felt too disillusioned to vote at all. An important unity message after a divisive primary.
And addressing the experience question head on.
Saying the campaign itself, building that movement, organizing it, was the proof he is ready to run a city of 8 million with a $112 billion budget, turning the grassroots success into evidence of executive capability.
A bold claim, but you see the logic. Yet Cuomo is still potentially lurking, right? That independent line.
He qualified for it, and he's examining it. So, while Mamdani is the Democratic nominee and the clear frontrunner in heavily Democratic NYC,
The general election isn't completely settled. Cuomo could still be a factor.
could be. Mamdani is considered highly likely a win, of course. The opposition is Mayor Adams, running as an independent, described as deeply unpopular.
Despite those drop charges, which always adds a wrinkle.
Right. And Republican Curtis Lewa, independent Jim Walden. But the real challenge for Mamdani might be scaling up.
The supporters are already saying the campaign needs to get more ambitious, stronger management structure.
And there's the worry about big money coming in against him in the general talk of even $100 million being spent to stop him.
That's a terrifying amount of money, pitting grassroots against potentially overwhelming financial opposition.
It's the next big test. So wrapping this deep dive up, it really was a political earthquake. A progressive grassroots victory over an establishment giant powered by smart strategy, especially using RCV.
Absolutely. And the big question for you, listening, is what this means beyond NYC. Is this a blip, or does it signal a real lasting shift in the Democratic Party towards candidates like Mamdani, especially after some tough national cycles for the party?
Does it change the calculation of who's viable, what kind of message resonates? It definitely challenges assumptions.
Yeah. What's the next impossible until it is done moment in politics?
Something to definitely keep an eye on as we watch how the party evolves from here.